Justice, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you to today's conference, which is the Philippine experience in the South China Sea arbitration case. My name is Muhammed Taha Yıldırım. I am currently an undergraduate student in the History Department of Boğaziçi University and also board member of the Political Science and International Relations Club. Today I will be moderating the conference, and before we move on, I would like to welcome and invite Ms. Charlene Manaquil, Consul General of the Republic of the Philippines, to the stage to deliver her opening speech.
S.Bensurto, respected officials of the Boğaziçi University represented by Dean for Student Affairs Assistant Professor Hassan Umut, Political Science and International Relations Student Club represented by its President Mustafa Jose, friends from the Consular Corps, the press and the private sector, esteemed faculty, students, who I believe are the leaders of tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. The Philippine Consul General in Istanbul, International Relations and Political Science Club, with the support of the Philippine Embassy in Ankara and Boğaziçi University, partnered to present to you a topic that is crucial to understanding the world that we inhabit. And for the students here, pivotal to your education in international relations. The geopolitical dynamics of the South China Sea may seem distant from the everyday lives of people here in Turkey, especially all the way here in the Marmara region. But their implications, I think, are significant not just for regional stability, but even global peace. This is so if one considers the South China Sea's economic and strategic importance as a vital shipping lane for freedom of navigation, its rich marine resources, and potential energy reserves. For the Philippines, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS, the Constitution of the Oceans, and the binding 2016 Arbitral Award are the twin anchors of foreign policy. The Arbitral Award is now part of international law. We stand before you here because we believe the value of the award is not just to the Philippines and the coastal states bordering the South China Sea, but to all states parties to UNCLOS and the international community as a whole. Philippine Secretary of Foreign Affairs Enrique Manalo, in comparing the award to a lighthouse, said it is a beacon whose guiding light serves all nations, one that will continue to illuminate the path for all who strive towards not just the peaceful resolution of disputes, but also the maintenance of a rules-based international order. We hope this forum fosters greater understanding of the importance of the rule of law and help inspire us to stand together to oppose actions that undermine it. Thank you very much.
I would like to thank Ms. Manaquil for her speech, and now I would like to invite my friend Mustafa to the stage to deliver his opening speech on behalf of our club.
Good afternoon, everyone. His Excellency Henry S.Bensurto Jr., Ambassador of the Republic of the Philippines to Turkey, distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends. As the President of the Boğaziçi University Political Science and International Relations Club, it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to our first event of the academic year. We are especially honored by the presence of His Honor Ambassador Bensurto, and I would like to thank him again in front of you. His participation makes this conference, which is on the Philippine experience in the South China Sea arbitration case, truly special as we are discussing critical, internationally important issues with several distinguished guests at Boğaziçi University. Once again, we would like to express our gratitude to His Honor Ambassador Bensurto for being here with us, and thank you all for joining us today. And I'm yielding the floor for my friend Taha. Thank you.
I would like to thank my friend Mustafa, and now I want to welcome the Ambassador of Philippines to Turkey, His Excellency Mr. Henry Bensurto Jr. to the stage. Before we start, I just want to quickly introduce His Excellency. Mr. Bensurto finished his AB Political Science from the University of Philippines, Juris Doctor from S.Bensurto College of Law, and has a distinction in Public International Law from Oxford University. He also has a diploma in the Law of the Sea from Rhodes Academy of Oceans, Law and Policy. Mr. Bensurto was a critical member of the Philippine legal team on the South China Sea arbitration and was a legal technical advisor to the foreign secretaries. He authored the Zone of Peace, Freedom, Friendship and Cooperation in the South China Sea, COPFFC, which later became the legal framework in the Philippine suit against China in 2013. He has also vital works regarding the sea issue of the Philippines. He was appointed amicus curiae by the Philippine Supreme Court for his expertise. Mr. Bensurto received presidential awards for his work on the ongoing issues. Since he is a professor of public international law at S.Bensurto University, he continues to speak at legal education seminars and conferences. Mr. Bensurto serves as the ambassador of Turkey, Georgia, and Azerbaijan. Now, I don't want to disturb His Excellency, and I'm quickly yielding the floor for him. You are welcome.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for a very kind introduction. I'd like to join our Consul General in expressing our gratitude to the organizers, first to the university professor and to the organization, Mustafa. Thank you very much. It's very refreshing to be in this environment, engaging students, because I'm also a student, and always there's something to learn from each other, and I continue to learn from you, hopefully today, with your questions, and we can continue our thought process. And so also thank you for the opportunity to engage on a very important issue, an issue that is for us an everyday thing. And I think for Turkey as well, because you are sandwiched in two conflicts. To the north, you have the Ukraine, and to your south, you have the Gaza ongoing. And to us also, it's very much the same in our region. And if in this region in the north, we're talking about how to end the war, we must have a conversation in my part of the region, how to prevent the war. And this is something that we cannot give up. We have to continue hoping against hope, because it is something that's very important for us and for our children. And I think, as the Consul General did mention, it's a narrowing world. It's a world that has been reduced by technology and progress. And so 11 hours away from here is something that really is not that far. We now know that whatever happens in any part of the world is something that will always have an implications on us. And the totem pole principle will always tell us that at the end of the day, at the end of the pole, it might be your turn. And I think what we're experiencing north and down in our region is something of a lesson that we to share so that we don't have to get into this bad experience. And so it is in that context, therefore, of how to attain peace, how to have rule of law prevail. Because there's no other substitute. Rule of law is something that has maintained relative peace since World War II. And it's not a perfect thing, but it is the best that we can have. And it is something, therefore, that we have to work for every day. It's a way of life that we have to live day in, day out. It's not an abstract concept. We have to be able to operationalize it in our daily lives. And this is what about South China Sea, and this is what about arbitration, and hopefully I could expand on that. So with that, and in that context, let me proceed with the discussion. I just want to perhaps alert you that this is a five-unit course back home. It's normally it takes me about a semester or even half of another semester to teach this. So today is really a challenge how to compress it in 1 hour. Hopefully I will be successful, but hopefully whatever we learn from this is something that will continue our thought process on how we can be part of that process of generating peace wherever we are. And so with that in mind, may I therefore start. Let me start the presentation by showing you some videos. I wanted to start the presentation. This is a departure from the orthodox traditional way where we shall present, because I'd like already to simulate the situation so that you have a feel exactly what the situation, and then from there I will try to analyze and explain why it is and how it is and what is the move forward. So with that, may I therefore request for the presentation of the video first. Anyway, as they are looking for the video, this video pictures to you the actual situation that our people in the South China Sea and the West Philippine Sea encounter on a day-to-day basis, more or less, between us and our northern neighbor. And maybe while they're working on the video, I just want to emphasize at the very outset that our objective in the South China Sea is not to create an enemy for anyone. That is not the purpose. We have a neighbor. It's something that's going to be there on a permanent basis. Unlike us individuals, if you don't like your neighbor, you just go to another village, subdivision, or another community. But that's not the case. Unfortunately, fortunately, I would say, with all the problems, this is how God wills it. This is how it is, geologically and geopolitically, and therefore it is something that we have to live. And so from that perspective of having a neighbor, it is always in the interest of anyone, Philippines included, to have good neighborly relations with all its neighbors, including our northern neighbor. But it's very hard, it's very difficult to have a friendly handshake that is so authentic and so genuine if the foot of your neighbor is on your foot. It's very difficult to smile, having a handshake before the camera when that big foot is on my foot. And perhaps what they're trying to say and tell, and the message is, Mr. Neighbor, is it possible for you to take your foot out of my foot? And therefore, our handshake could be authentic and genuine. And I think this is the sincere attitude and desire of a small country like us. But unfortunately, that foot, I will explain, is the expansionist policy of our big neighbor. And I will try to analyze what that expansionist policy through the presentation. So, since they are ready, perhaps you can go ahead with that. some sound, or otherwise I'll be the one making the sound. You'll never like that. Maybe sometimes technology works, sometimes it does not. So, therefore, I will have to beg your indulgence to explain what you're seeing. This is the West Philippine Sea or the South China Sea. By the way, I will explain later the terminologies in terms of the South China Sea is a semi-enclosed sea, semi-enclosed by definition because it is bordered by several littoral countries, including the Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, Brunei, Vietnam, and China. It is semi-enclosed because it's not completely closed. It has access to the bigger part of the ocean, the Pacific Ocean to the east, Celebes Sea down south, and down west is the Pacific Ocean. And when you look at the broader picture of the map, you will see that it is a continuing sea lanes of communication, and therefore you cannot isolate one sea from another. They are part of a continuing. And by looking at the map later on, you will see how the implications are, both in terms of the region and in a global scale. Perhaps at some point I can even explain the connection between Ukraine and the South China Sea. Why Turkey and Europeans need to be involved as well on the South China Sea issue and vice versa. Maybe we can have that conversation, but be that as it may, what you're seeing is essentially our people experiencing in our own backyard. We are being prevented from going into our own backyard. Just imagine yourself having a house, having a backyard, but right in your backyard, something powerful who owns a neighbor who lives in a big mansion telling you that's not yours, that's ours. Before you can go there, before you can plant mustard seeds or whatever you want to do there, we're being told you have to get our permission. And this is what you're seeing there. And I wanted to show you that video. Actually, it would have been better with all the sounds, but unfortunately we don't have that, so that you will have a feel when you use all your senses and teleporting yourselves. Just imagine yourselves being in those ships, encountering those dangers, those risks. You will have a feel how it is to be prevented from going into what is yours. Maybe if the other videos are without the sound, maybe you can jump to the other. I just wanted to show you the methodology that our northern neighbor is doing in terms of water cannon, and very lately using axe, spears, knives to actually prevent us from going there to what is ours. Okay, I think we have a very limited time, so I don't want to lose time with the technology, so I will already jump. But maybe at some point we can show that. Maybe there's also another video at the end. If you're going to share that later, then this is your time to share the sound to fix the technical problem. But so that there's no lull, let me go and jump to the discussion. If you can go to the PowerPoint now. I wanted to show the video so you will have a simulation of exactly what is the situation. But the point in showing that is the question, whose place is that? Because China is saying it's theirs, and therefore, on that belief, they are preventing us. On the other hand, we feel, we think that it is ours, and therefore we have all the right to be there. Therefore, the question is, whose area is it really? Is it ours, or is it China? And so that question can actually be objectively decided. It is something that can be objectively
analyzed, defined, and identified. And so that process. So if you can go to the next slide, please. Let me just show you a satellite. This is a satellite, more or less picture, but with some illustrations. The area that I was about to show you is in the Sabines Shoal. Sabines Shoal is about less than 100, it's about 120 nautical miles from Palawan. So let me just use this. This is the Palawan. This is an island of the Philippines, and this is the sea. As mentioned, it's a satellite picture, so you will see this. It's not an island, it's a submerged. This is reed bank. By the way, reed bank, there's a suspicion that it contains about 3 trillion cubic feet of natural gas and about 54 billion barrels of oil. But we cannot utilize it because we're being prevented from doing that. Just imagine, once this is done, the implication of that in terms of the energy sector, not just for us, but on a global scale, because that volume is really huge. Anyhow, the encounter, the engagements, it's in this area. Sabines Shoal, later I will explain, is a low tide elevation for those who are in law. It's a low tide elevation, and therefore it's not a territory that can be claimed. And if it's not a territory, there cannot be a territorial dispute, essentially. I will go into the details of that, but it's a submerged area that's happening here, and it's within our 200, essentially. So I will explain that. The other part, north, is actually Scarborough Shoal. I will also show that. So this is just to situate exactly where those video clips, have you seen them, is happening. Next. So this is another illustration. So you will see that this is the 200, and this is the area of Palawan, and that is Sabines Shoal. So it's basically within. So let me, you have a question, sir?
Just for better imagination, this is the 9-dash line, and to explain, I think that you can't go 36 kilometers deep to the agency in Turkey, so that's how the 9-dash line is placed.
I will also explain that. So maybe those are mysteries for now, and we'll try to unlock that later. So for now, maybe since you mentioned the 9-dash line, this is the 9-dash line, and that's 34 nautical miles from Palawan and 36 nautical miles. And this is the theoretical 200, all right? Okay, so I just wanted to situate you with that in terms of those video clips. Next slide, please. So I think at some point I started by saying, who really has a right in the area? I think that's critical. Because if you have a right, if it's your backyard, therefore you have all the rights to utilize your backyard, right? If it's not yours, but then there's no way you should. So it's a question of whose it is, really. What is ours? What is not ours? In the same way you can ask that question to China, what is theirs and what is not theirs? This cannot be defined on who says what, but this is something that has to be defined in an objective basis, and that's the law. And therefore, we have to go back to the law. And when we discuss what is the law, we have to go back to the source. And so in the context of maritime entitlements, I'm not talking of territory, later I will explain the distinction between the two. The question of what are your maritime entitlements is essentially addressed by international law. And in that context, the primary law that we always refer to is actually the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. And it is almost of universal application. I understand Turkey is not yet a signatory to UNCLOS, but be that as it may, many of the provisions of the convention, by convention I'm referring to the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, they have been already graduated into customary international law. I'm not sure to what degree But later on you can ask what's the distinction between the two. Essentially, yeah, conventional law is something that's written between parties. And if you are a party to something that's written like a contract, therefore the provisions of that contract is the law between you. And so maritime entitlements, these are entitlements that are addressed in the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. And therefore, to go back to the question, what is the maritime entitlement of China? What is the maritime entitlement of the Philippines? You have to go back to what the law provides. And so from this perspective, therefore, let me go straight to what UNCLOS provides. This is just to put all of us on the same page, because some of you, I see my colleague there who's an expert himself on the law of the sea. I see some, but not all of us. So therefore, my apologies for those who are advanced in this, but just to make sure we're all on the same page, so let me just discuss very briefly what are the entitlements provided under UNCLOS. Next slide, please. So here you see the first thing that you have to do for you to be able to understand what your maritime entitlements are would be the baseline. Anyway, just to begin, and I think this principle is very important, you cannot claim a sea independent of the land. Under international law and UNCLOS, there is a basic fundamental principle, which is that the land dominates the sea. What does that principle tell you? It means that you can only have maritime entitlements, which is about the waters, only when you have the land as an anchor point. You cannot go to the Aegean Sea, you cannot go to the Mediterranean Sea, you cannot go to the Pacific Ocean, you cannot go to the Atlantic Ocean, and with your GPS, point A to point B to point C to point D to point A, claim it as yours. You cannot claim a water either in the past, in the present, or even in the future. There's no such thing under customary international where you can claim a sea independent of the land. It's always anchored in the land. Do not forget that. That is a principle that is overriding. Based on that principle, therefore, if you have a land, the first thing you have to do is to have a baseline. Here I'm using archipelagic baselines because the Philippines is an archipelago and we're an archipelagic state. So anything inward, next, is actually called archipelagic waters and internal waters. Internal waters are the rivers, the lagoons, the lakes inside. They are under complete sovereignty of the state. Outward is the 12 nautical mile territorial sea. It's territorial sea because it's an extension of your territory, and therefore all laws, including criminal laws, extend to that sea, and therefore there is sovereignty over there. As you go further away from the land, that sovereignty is derogated and reduced into sovereign rights. Sovereign rights, as distinguished from sovereignty, is something lower. So as you go further, 24 nautical miles would be your contiguous zone, and next, 200 nautical miles is your exclusive economic zone. Let me just explain this very briefly. It's not a territory, but the sovereign rights is limited to the exploration and exploitation of all resources there. Living or non-living, organic or non-organic. In simple words, nobody can fish there except the coastal state because it is exclusive. All right? One can have freedom of navigation, one can pass through that sea, but cannot lower a net and catch fish. That is only reserved on an exclusive basis to the coastal state. Then below, because no island floats, there is a prolongation of the land, and so that land is a separate legal regime. It's called continental shelf, with the same distance of 200 nautical miles, same rights prevail, which is exclusively to explore, exploit all resources, living or non-living, organic or non-organic. In other words, only the coastal state has the exclusive right to exploit resources, natural gas or oil. One can be on a scuba diving, walk for as long as you want, but you cannot get seashells. You cannot get natural gas. That's reserved exclusively to the coastal state. But the difference is that that juridical continental shelf can be extended to not more than 350 nautical miles, provided you're able to identify the foot of the slope. The difference this is ipso facto. I'm sorry, I'm using technical term under law. Ipso facto means as a matter of fact, and also ipso iure as a matter of law. You don't have to do anything, and that's yours. But with the extended continental shelf, you have to use science to prove to a group of scientists called the Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf with the UN to prove that the foot of the slope, the natural prolongation, extends wherever it is. If it is below 150, you can claim this, but if it is more than, that's the limit. I just want to explain that. And then from there, beyond 200 is the freedom of navigation in the high seas. There's also freedom of navigation here with a difference. This is sui generis because it is a class of its own. It's not high seas. I just want to make sure, although there is also freedom of navigation, here the flag state jurisdiction applies as well. And below is called the area or the heritage of mankind. Therefore, a powerful country cannot go there and extract resources. They have to go through certain procedures. There's Part 11 and all the succeeding protocols negotiated by within the UN system. So with this, I'll forgo many other details, but you have an idea what the maritime entitlements are. So let me apply these maritime entitlements in the Philippines. So if this is the Philippines, this is South China Sea, all right? This is the baseline. This is the archipelagic baselines. If you have questions about the differences between archipelagic baselines and normal baselines and straight baselines, we can do that later on. There are differences. But for an archipelago, we decided to be an archipelagic state using the archipelagic baselines. And from there, this is a theoretical, this is the theoretical projection. This is a combination of internal waters and archipelagic waters. And outside would be the territorial sea in the blue, the orange, the contiguous zone. And since the Kalayaan Island Group, by the way, Kalayaan Island Group, this is the Spratlys. This is the disputed area. They're composed of different geological features. They number anywhere between 94 or 95 to 294 features. The counting method will vary from who the author is, because different authors will have different counting methods. Sometimes they count it by clusters, others individually, and that explains the differences. All right, but anyway, as you may note, and this is the theoretical 200, and there will be overlaps, of course. But don't worry, the overlaps will always be subject to maritime delimitation. So that's not really a problem. Here, you may have noted that in the Spratlys, we have not put 200 because from the very beginning, we have suspected and we have a strong reason to believe that none of these features is an island capable of maximum projection. Very quickly, let me just introduce to you the difference between low tide elevation, island, and rocks, because I think this is critical in the South China Sea resolution. Earlier I said the land dominates the sea, so there must be a land. But the land, there are three categories of islands. They're all called islands, but there are actually three categories. One is the naturally formed island, and an island that is naturally formed will project maximum entitlement up to 200, including extended continental shelf. But there's another kind of island which is called low tide elevation. Remember this, a low tide elevation is a coral reef, a sand shoal, a sand cave, which you see now, but later you don't, depending on the high tide and low tide. You will see it above water during low tide, but disappears during high tide. All right? So when you have that feature, it's called low tide elevation. At this point, I want to clarify. It's not an island, and therefore, it is not entitled to any maritime entitlement. By itself, based on the cases decided by various tribunals, it is a continental shelf by technical definition. All right? So, that's the low tide elevation. A third kind of island, quote unquote, is rocks. Rocks, they're always above water during low tide or high tide. What's the difference between an island and a rock? A rock is not capable of sustaining human habitation on its own and not capable of sustaining economic life on its own. So, if you have those two criteria for those who want to be a lawyer, this is for you. You can have a bread and butter on this. What exactly is that? But joking aside, if it is not capable of sustaining human habitation on its own, it is a rock. As a rock, the maritime entitlement is limited to 12 nautical miles. All right? Okay, now to continue. Next. Unfortunately, this maritime entitlements is not only for the Philippines, it's also for other countries. But this is just to illustrate. So, while other countries have that, based on UNCLOS, next slide, please. So here, next. So you will see the extent of the national jurisdiction or exclusive economic zone of the various littoral countries in the region. And they are all, go back first. So as you can see, there's an overlap in the north. They can be subject to maritime delimitation. There's one south, they can be subject to maritime delimitation. That's not a problem. UNCLOS provides the mechanism by which they can be limited. And cases under international law, median line or equidistant line, there are various methodologies on how to do that. In fact, Philippines has already addressed this problem with Indonesia, all right? But the bigger problem, and this is based on international law, but the problem in the case of China, it's not based on international law, but based on drawing. So somebody went to the map, had a pencil pen or a pen, and then just draw. And that is the 9-dash line. When it was drawn, I can give you a history, but if you're interested, but I think the important point here is this. It has no basis, somebody just drew. It has no interpretation, it has no meaning. Before, suddenly in 2009, China gave it a meaning as historic waters. All right? It's not an old claim. The map is old, but what it means is not old. It is something that is very contemporary and very modern. It's an interpretation that China suddenly gave in 2009. I can give you details on that also, but just to reflect, this is the 9-dash line. No basis under international law, and they just draw. The problem with the 9-dash line is that it overlaps 90% with our exclusive economic zone. It overlaps with Malaysia and Brunei and Vietnam and also Indonesia, all right, to the same extent. And what China is saying is that it has undisputed territorial sovereignty over the area, all right? Next. But it's not the only problem in the South China Sea. Other than the 9-dash line, which has no basis, they use, quote unquote, UNCLOS also, because as you can see, I mentioned, in between these littoral countries, you have this group of islands, and they're being claimed by several countries. And you can see the color coding in terms of who occupies what, all right? This technically is the territorial dispute. Territorial dispute has something to do with the question, who owns the island? That's a territorial dispute. Maritime dispute has something to do, are you an island? Are you a low tide elevation? Or are you a rock? And therefore, what is your maritime entitlement? That's the maritime dispute. So this, technically speaking, is the territorial dispute. However, in the case of China, beyond the territorial dispute, they're also using this dispute to have the maritime dispute with the respective exclusive economic zone by projecting 200 nautical miles, maximum projection. Next. As you can see, the maximum projection overlaps also. So it's not just the 9-dash line. It's the expansive projection of maritime entitlement over those species. And by doing that, what is left with the Philippines is just this, 10%. So if you have 550,000 square kilometers of exclusive economic zone, that means we only have 10,000 square kilometers that is exclusively ours. Therefore, in this area, which is reed bank, we cannot drill oil because we have to get their permission. In this area, we cannot fish because we have to get their permission. And it is because of this preposterous claim that they are using to actually suggest as a solution joint development. We cannot agree to that. Let me explain what that joint development concept is. Professor Hassan, Professor Hassan is wearing a very nice suit. That suit and tie, necktie, are all his. He paid for that. That's why he's wearing it. But here comes me. I have a caliber 45 and an AK-47, and I'm telling Professor Hassan, I just want to remind you that that suit is not only yours, it's also mine. But I cannot show a receipt, right? I only have the weapons. But Professor Hassan, we don't have to kill each other over that suit. We're brothers, we're neighbors. What we can do is this. Why don't you wear it today, and tomorrow you give it to me, I wear it, and therefore that's the compromise, right? We share like brothers. We don't kill each other, we share. But from the very beginning, I have no right. I only have a right because I have an AK-47 because I say so. That's not the joint development. Now, for those oil companies who always pursue, put this. If there is a board of directors on a joint development, it will not be a fair decision in any boardroom policy. Why? Because the Chinese National Oil Company has the People's Liberation Army on the ground. And therefore, any disagreement on the board, for any private companies who want to engage in that, they will always be discriminated and will have no real power because you have no People's Liberation Army on the ground. And so it's not going to, and if you allow joint development in one area, you will have joint development in the rest, because that's the whole logic of the 9-9. And that's why our neighbors cannot allow us to agree to China, because us allowing that will have a cascading effect to the rest. All right? All right. So this is the expansionist policy, but that's not all. It is an abstract concept, but it's a living, breathing. Many disputes all over the world are there, but they're not dangerous. In the case of this expansionist policy of China, it's very dangerous because it's living, it's breathing, and every day it's growing. Let me show how it is growing, and this we call creeping assertion. Now it has converted itself into creeping aggression. Let me show you what I meant by that. So, in the case of creeping assertion of China, they give life to the expansionist policy. In the 70s, they occupied Parasols by kicking out South Vietnamese forces from Parasols Islands. Nobody complained because it's too far from Limestone. Why should I bother myself with something that is far? And therefore, no country objected to this. Despite the fact that it violated international, because you know, aggression, use of force, they're already not lawful, all right? Other countries could have weighed in and put their opinion, that's wrong, but not. And so China, as a growing child who got what he wanted, grew up to be a brat, right? Let me show how that brat is. For those who are parents, none of you are, I suppose, but me as a parent, when you are trying to rear your child, you want to teach him there's a teachable window for kids to grow up. And you have to tell him what is right and what is wrong during those teachable windows. Because when he's grown up and he's powerful, you cannot teach him right or wrong. You will be kicked out of the house already because he's more powerful than you are. And so let's show how this grew up. And so in the 70s, they were able to escape with that. By the 80s, every decade or so, they were able to move down south, Fiery Cross Reef. Here, they killed more than 50 Vietnamese naval personnel. Again, nobody complained. But as the saying goes, at the totem pole principle, at the end of the day, you will find yourself at the end of the pole. And true enough, it was our time to understand that principle. Because by the 1990s, they were in Mischief Reef, which is about 126 nautical miles. Again, Mischief Reef is a low tide elevation. Sometimes they're above water, but during high tide, they disappear. And therefore, what did I say? A low tide elevation is not a territory, and therefore there cannot be a territorial dispute. So what are they saying about that? It is a continental shelf, and therefore, as a continental shelf, it is subject to proximity. It is just a question of in whose 200 nautical miles is it situated. Then you can immediately make a conclusion whether it's a continental shelf of what country it is. Then, next, because of mischief reef, they told us to be quiet. This is the first time we exercise appeasement because they promised trade, they promised investment. And so, okay, shelf territorial dispute, let's cooperate. We believe in that. First time we believe in that, and then they dangled the declaration of conduct as a way to sort of, this is done. We have an agreement. Later on, we will understand that every agreement that they try to conclude with us has a different motivation on their part. It is to legitimize the unilateral changing of status quo. And I will explain that. So every time they will change the status quo of the region, once they have changed that, then they apply diplomacy and agreement, bilateral, to sort of legitimize the new status quo generated by their aggression. I will explain that. But here, so we thought everything is solved with the declaration of conduct, especially with paragraph 5, which says, no more occupation of unoccupied. It's nice to listen to, but the problem with the DOC is it did not define what is the disputed area. There was no definition. And so later on in 2009, we will learn that the disputed area is the entire South China Sea. But at this point, it was not clear. And we never bothered ourselves. We just wanted this paragraph 5. Then later on, move forward, it was Reed Bank. Reed Bank is a purely submerged area, a continental shelf. Then later on, they declared in 2009 the entire South China Sea in their 9-9 map in 2009. Then later on, they were telling us the oil blocks that were being explored 36 and 34 nautical miles away, we cannot unless they give their consent. Next, Scarborough Shoal. By 2012, they forced us out of Scarborough Shoal. Next, they were imposing fishing ban from 1996 or 1999 to 2011. It was on the first quadrant. By 2012, they were imposing the fishing ban to the second quadrant. And then they auctioned 9 oil blocks, but not in their EEZ, but on the EEZ or continental shelf of Vietnam. The next, James Shoal, Malaysia, 85 nautical miles away, they were there. And then they, now, to this day, they're doing sovereignty patrol over the entire South China Sea. What's the difference? Is that freedom of navigation? No. Freedom of navigation, you pass through, you traverse without any claim for sovereignty. Sovereignty patrol is that you're patrolling it because it's yours. And that's the problem. Next. And then later on, another continental shelf, Ayungin Shoal, they were threatening us on that. So the video should have shown exactly what's happening there. Next. So anyway, to summarize, what they have done with their expansionist policy and the force and the creeping assertion, what they have transformed the South China Sea into a complex spaghetti bowl. So let me show. So if this is the case, next, maybe you have to backtrack a little bit. Next. 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 So this is the complex. This is the South China Sea. It's like a bowl of spaghetti with a lot of crisscrossing ball. And every time those lines crisscross, it's a dispute. And so what we wanted, I think part of the solution is to unlock it by taking out as many lines as you can. And so that was the first clue that we have. And so you can see, if you take out many of those lines that are not legitimate or not without basis under international, this is exactly what happens. And this is how we wanted to solve in a fair, just way for all. So, meaning to say, you can leave the territorial dispute, but you can solve the maritime dispute. Because now you understand that the dispute in the South China Sea are basically two. the territorial dispute, which has something to do with the question who owns the fissures, and then the maritime dispute, what is the character of the fissures? And therefore, that was the first clue. By proving the character of the fissures, we will understand exactly the extent of the maritime entitlement. By understanding the extent of the maritime entitlement, we will have a clear idea of what is legitimately disputed and what is not legitimately disputed. Next. I'll just go fast because he's looking at me already. So we used to try bilateral diplomacy. Don't get me wrong. It's not, we didn't go to arbitration immediately. For the longest time, we have been negotiating with them. But a bilateral negotiation can only be fruitful if both parties are sincere. Unfortunately, there is a difference of motivation and objective. Insofar as the Philippines is concerned, we want to negotiate because we want to settle the dispute once and for all in the most durable way so that it provides a just, lasting, durable peace. In the case of China, that's not the case. They're using negotiation as a smokescreen. How? To deflect international attention, to legitimize every change in the status quo. All right? So that are the two objectives. And that's why you will hear the same articulation from China. Let's resolve this in a friendly way. We have to create, for the last 30 years, these are the articulations. And where has it gotten us? The region is much worse than it was 30 years ago. That is how China has made use of the South China Sea as its playground and made full of many, including us, in terms of its diplomacy. Next. 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 So, let me just illustrate. So, what is China doing? So, next. So, what they will do is occupy a feature. They didn't occupy an island before, but what they will do, they will occupy, and then tension goes up, then they will apply diplomacy, tension goes down, then they said, the international community need not come because we're talking. And next, and then after that, they are there. They're there. They don't leave. Right? That's true with parcels. Then later on, after some relative peace, they will again occupy, tension goes up, they apply, we're friends, why don't we talk? We can settle everything through friendly bilateral negotiations. International community, don't get involved. This is between us and the Philippines. But at the end of the day, they are there. Next, and so forth. You will see exactly that pattern over the last 30 years. Next, 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 next.
Mr. Ambassador, they mentioned that they can play the video now if you want.
Maybe we'll do that later so that the flow, we don't, I'll just finish this and then we can show that. So this is what happens. So over a period of time, you see how it was. Every time we negotiate with them, produces nothing because they're not interested. And over a period of time, you suddenly see that you have lost so much. And so, next. And therefore, because of this, we have to be now creative. We cannot put all our money on one basket, which is bilateral. Because what we have learned, we can be in this room. We can always complain, but what good does it? And this is, and China will just say, oh, complain as you want. Anyway, it's just in this room, right? Nothing happens. And then we want to create a conducive environment before we can negotiate. For the last 30 years, that has been the articulation, but the environment is still there, not there to have a lasting solution. Next, and so we filed the arbitration as a creative option. What is the purpose? Because you said it's yours, we said it's ours. Maybe we need a third party that can objectively decide what is yours and what is ours. We're not going to claim anything more than what is provided us, because that's not going to create peace, right? And so this is the background. We filed for an arbitration under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. For those who are lawyers, if you want me to ask me about the technicalities, I will answer that maybe in the question and answer. But suffice it for now that we filed this arbitration, and by 2016 we have the result. And the result of the arbitration was something like this. Let me show. So if this is South China Sea before arbitration, the first two submissions, we questioned the 9-line. The tribunal said China is wrong. As you can see, it disappeared. There's no basis, it disappeared. Let me just emphasize this. Either in fact or in law. I wish to emphasize. So it's not just an interpretation of the law, but also as a matter of fact. If you want an explanation, I can explain that. So those historic, quote unquote, they're not true. All right? Next. Then we said Scarborough Shoal is not an island capable of 200. The tribunal agreed with us, and it is a rock not capable of 200 exclusive economic zone. Next submission. We said that Subi Reef, Mischief Reef, and Second Thomas Shoal are low tide elevation. So LTE is the acronym for that. And therefore not capable of 200. And the tribunal said they're not. All right? As you can see, the larger circles are fast disappearing. Next, we said Govan and McKinnon Reefs are rocks, and therefore not capable of 200, only 12 nautical miles, and the tribunal said they're not. Then, Fiery Cross Reef and Quarteron Reef and Johnson Reefs, these are not islands, they're not capable of 200. The tribunal said they're not. As you can see, the disputed area, which is caused by the maritime entitlement, because if the island is disputed, therefore the waters around it, or the entitlements, will also be disputed, only to the extent that it is entitled to. Therefore, if it is 200, then the dispute extends to 200. But if the entitlement is only 12 nautical miles or none, then there's no dispute with low tide elevation. Then if it is a rock, then only up to the extent of 12 nautical miles. All right? And therefore, this is the result of that. The rest, okay, the tribunal was also very clear that in the reed bank, it's completely Philippines. And therefore, we have all the right to explore and exploit that. In fact, the tribunal was very clear in saying that China was engaged in harassing Filipino fishermen. To that extent, it was very clear. Next, the rest I will forego for lack of time, because this I think are the most important. And finally, Mischief Reef and the Ayungin Shoal, because I think this is very important. What is critical is that reed bank, which by the way, was the trigger for the current crisis. I can say this because I was deep in the negotiation. It was the reed bank. Later on, it was also decided Ayungin Shoal or Second Thomas Shoal and Mischief Reef, these are low tide elevations. As low tide elevations, because they are within the 200 of the Philippines, they are continental shelves of the Philippines. Therefore, they are exclusively within the sovereign rights of the Philippines to the exclusion of China. Therefore, if you apply this, they have no right to prevent us from going to Ayungin Shoal. They have no right to make an artificial island in Mischief Reef. But as you can see, if you explore your internet, you will see the degree of reclamation that they have done in the area. With that reclamation, you can also imagine the destruction of the marine environment. Okay? Next. Anyway, the last point here, the 16th, we only submitted 15 submissions, but at the last minute, Taiwan joined in and submitted a supplemental pleading for those who are lawyers, memorial, it's called. Actually, we did not object to that anymore. Technically, they should not have been, but Philippines were fever because we want a resolution, so we allowed it and did not oppose it. So Taiwan submitted, and they questioned that Ito Aba is an island. By the way, Ito Aba is the biggest feature in the Spratlys. And so, if Ito Aba is indeed an island, capable of 200, can you go back? As you can see, it will still occupy the most controversial reed bank. But the tribunal decided it's not an island. And so, as you can see this. So next, I'm almost done. I just want you to see the comparison between South China Sea before arbitration, which is a bowl of spaghetti noodles. Now, it's more clear. The disputed areas are just these features because it is proper. Because if there are territorial, rocks are, therefore the question who owns them is a legitimate question. And it will take perhaps centuries to settle them. But we can settle the maritime. And as I said, because we all came from COVID, we don't have to mix the infected from the infected. We can isolate the infected and allow the healthy people to live their daily lives. And this is how we can cooperate, right? The world should not stop with those. And we can isolate them. And this is how we have isolated them. Can you go back? And this is how we have, let me give you numbers. In the past, 540,000 square kilometers, remember that, although approximation, of the exclusive economic zone of the Philippines are disputed on the basis of those preposterous claims of our northern neighbor. Another 540,000 of continental shelf is also disputed. That means over 1 million square kilometers. But now, with this, and it's very clear, the only disputed area in the South China Sea is about 13,000 square kilometers. 13, 1-3. Because if you put all the features there, they will only measure up to 5,000 square kilometers. That's the total number of the land area in the Spratlys. But because they're spread out, you have to include the waters, the total is 13,000 square kilometers. All right? Next. So, the regional implications. The regional implications, because the benefit is not just for the Philippines, it's for our neighbors, Malaysia, Indonesia. Because if 9-dash line is not correct in the Philippines, it follows that it should not be correct in the case of Malaysia, in the case of Brunei, in the case of Vietnam. If it is false on one, it must be false on the rest, because it follows only one logic. And so you will see that by taking out the 9-dash line, it benefits all the littoral countries. By clarifying the characters of the features, we also benefit the rest. And then, next, so the freedom of navigation is very clear. I'll tell you. It's not true that freedom of navigation is free and intact with all the reclamations. We're seeing that already. When they are present in the area, it always gives them the capacity to interdict any time of their own will. All right? So it's not true that they guarantee freedom of... That's not true at all. We see this in the video later on. That's not true. And so if that interdiction happens to the Philippines, it can happen to anyone in terms of the freedom of navigation, in terms of free trade, because about 40 to 60% of global trade pass through this area. All right? And so you can see the global implications if that interdiction happens in the future. Next, the continental shelf of everyone will be affirmed. Next, and then the high seas. There is a high seas, the donut hole. All right, and then finally, this will have effect in global trade, in regional security, essentially. Next. So, next. Let me end with 2 videos. I'm at the tail end. I just wanted to, can you go next slide? In my own, I want to leave you with this. If you can, put some. I want to leave you with this. It's a powerful message, essentially. You must have seen this in the web, but I just want to repeat it. Even without the sun, there's
One of my lectures ever again.
I don't understand.
I am not going to ask a second time. Thank you. Why are there laws? What are laws for? Anyone?
Social order.
To protect a person's personal rights.
So that you can rely on the government.
Justice? Thank you. Tell me, was I unfair to your classmate just now? Indeed I was. So, why didn't any of you protest? Why didn't any of you try and stop me? Why didn't you want to prevent this injustice? You see, what you have just learnt, you wouldn't have understood in 1,000 hours of lectures unless you lived it. You didn't say anything because you weren't affected yourself. And this attitude speaks against you and against life. You think it doesn't concern you, so it's none of your business. Well, I'm here to say, if you don't help bring about justice, then one day you too may experience injustice, and there will be nobody there to stand before you. Truth and justice lives through us all, and we must fight for it. Because in life and work, we often live next to each other, but not with each other. We console ourselves that the problems of others are nothing to do with us, none of our business. And we go home glad at night that we're spared, but it's about standing up for each other. Every day an injustice happens in business, sport, or on the tram. Relying on someone else to take care of it is not good enough. It is our duty to be there for others, to speak up for others when they cannot. I am here to teach you the power of your voice. I want you to learn critical thinking to empower you to stand up for what is right, even if it means going against what everyone else is doing. Let's begin.
Thank you. Since the videos at the beginning is already ready, maybe we can show if you are. Just to give you what ordinary Coast Guard experience on a day-to-day. This is the real situation, and it's now. As we speak, perhaps. This is how they block our ships from providing food to our personnel, to our own continental shelf. This is not armed force. I'm not sure what it is. So he lost a finger, one of our soldiers. So all we could do is video it. But look at the aggression of the Chinese Coast Guard with the axe, spears, knives. No island there. And they have developed a laser that's blinding also. And they steal. You can see they're stealing. I didn't know that stealing is now legitimate. We have to give it to the Coast Guard also because they exercise self-restraint despite the situation. So they have just lowered the threshold of what armed attack is. And how they ram our boats. Maybe you can go to the water cannon. Even our aircrafts are challenged. So they continue to challenge our aircraft patrolling. This is in Panatag, north.
At sea or up in the air, this is the reality for Philippine government assets that patrol parts of the West Philippine Sea. Threats in the form of radio challenges from Chinese vessels. At least three more challenges from a self-identified Chinese warship are issued against the Philippine Coast Guard's C-2081 plane as it flies over Bahol and Sinloc or Panatag Shoal today, the 15th of May 2024. Rappler is on board a maritime domain awareness flight above the shoal, located some 120 nautical miles off the coast of Zambales province. We are here to see for ourselves the sheer number of Chinese government ships that have been deployed to the shoal ahead of ating ito's civilian mission to bring fuel, food, and supplies to Filipino fishermen. Inside Panatag Shoal is at least one Chinese maritime militia ship. The PCG says it's installing not one, but two floating barriers. Right at the entrance of its lagoon is a China Coast Guard vessel. Several more blue ships, the Chinese maritime militia, stand guard around the shoal. In its immediate vicinity, there's at least one People's Liberation Army Navy vessel.
There are two ways for us to interpret this.
Maybe you can go to the water cannon. By the way, they have developed a technology of the water cannon. It's really blinding. It really hurts people, actually. And it's a hypersonic type of water cannon, not the ordinary. They developed this in Hong Kong. How they ram up. And then they, in their public media press release, it was us who rammed them. But this is the video. So their technique, they go there up front, so they will be hit, and then they will say, we rammed them. And then the next procedure is, later on you will see they will ram us. So that's the first part. The second part is that they will now ram us. There. Okay, then can you go to the next? And this is the number of vessels as we speak now.
Vessels of Chinese ships in the West Philippine Sea. According to the Navy's latest tally, a total of 251 China Coast Guard ships, People's Liberation Army Navy warships, and Chinese maritime militia vessels were launched from September 17 to 23. This figure is higher than the 157 Chinese vessels monitored in the previous week from September 10 to 16. The latest figure also surpasses the previous record of 207 Chinese vessels logged in the West Philippine Sea from September 3 to 9. The Navy also records the biggest number of Chinese warships to date in a Scondo Shoal in the West Philippine Sea, with a total of 11 People's Liberation Army Navy warships seen at the shoal from September 17 to 23. Despite this, a Navy spokesperson for the West Philippine Sea, Rear Admiral Roy Vincent Trinidad, maintains that China does not have a de facto control of Escondo Shoal, even after the pullout of BRP-3 from Banwa. Beijing claims most of the South China Sea, including the West Philippine Sea, despite an international tribunal ruling that its assertion have no merit. China continues to reject the arbitral ruling and acts aggressively against Philippine vessels in the West Philippine Sea.
Anyway, I'll stop there, and then let me end the presentation with the last video. Before we show that video, I just want to also take this opportunity to thank all of you, the organizers. But we have also with us some lawyers that I'd like to express our gratitude, because most recently we have Turkish lawyers who helped us. There were 6 Filipinos who were acquitted by a court, and I think I would like to take this opportunity to express our gratitude. Please, sir, if I may ask you to stand up and be recognized. Ladies and gentlemen, you have to be proud of this lawyer. With all his expertise, putting that expertise to good use and to reach justice. And as I mentioned, justice is something that you live day in, day out. If you want that reflected in the foreign policy, it's something that you have to live. And he exemplifies what that concept is all about. Sir, thank you very much. Thank you, sir. So maybe we can give him a round of applause. Ladies and gentlemen. By the way, we went to the same school, so maybe pardon me for the commercial. I want to Rhodes Academy on Oceans Law is something we learned about law of the sea. With this, may I now bring you to the last video on this, and then we can go to the Q&A, question and answer portion. Please.
It's
On that, I end my presentation. Thank you very much.
Mr. Bensurto, I would like to thank you very much for this great presentation. You just summarized an entire semester-long lecture to just 1 hour approximately, so thank you very much. And also we watched the video of how the Philippines took China to the court and gained its legal rights, so that was fantastic. Before we proceed with the Q&A, I just want to ask a personal question. So I just want to start by myself. So my question is, Turkey is facing a similar problem. The problem might not be the same 100%, but we also face a similar problem in the Eastern Mediterranean Sea. So regarding this, how would you identify the problem? What do you prefer? If you were a Turkish citizen, what would you do as a diplomat, as a Juris Doctor? What would you say about this problem?
Thank you for that question. I think you have to look at it first from the objective perspective and then law. It is not exactly the same as the South China Sea because here you have real islands in the Aegean Sea facing you. It is a question of maritime delimitation. And so you have to go over all cases on maritime delimitation, and you will see that in the methodology of maritime delimitation, islands are not all the time given full projection, even if they are islands, especially when they are set off with a bigger coastline. All right? And so there has to be that equitable solution. And so your lawyers must now go through each and every case, the certain case, how it was in terms of delimitation between Romania and Ukraine. So the question of islands, do you give them maximum rights or limited rights? What are the methodologies in terms of maritime delimitation? So this will figure out, and these principles you can use, the equidistant and the equitable. You can use these methodologies first in terms of assessing what's your maximum and your minimum. Then you have an idea, if you apply law in all directions, then you can see what are the options. For you to identify the range of options. And so this is something that you can use for purposes also of negotiations. Because at the end of the day, you have to start with the negotiation. Because everything starts with the dialogue. If you have a country who is open enough and has the sincerity to sit down with you and willing to settle the matter in a very rational basis, this is something worth exploring. And we did this for 30 years. Unfortunately, we have a different setup, the big power. You know, in diplomacy, they always say, in the negotiation, the big power will just bully the small power. This is something that we have learned. But in your case, it's not the case. It's just the same. So you explore that possibility of diplomacy first, and you have certain rational legal approach that you can put on the table. But you have to understand first what your range of options are and test the ideas, essentially. And you can now calibrate that. Then you may also wish to look at the possibility, for example, also of using international instruments. And you don't have to close the doors. And you just have to continue examining because it's all evolving as well. And see how these principles now will apply. First, if you go on a bilateral diplomacy. Second, is this something that we can decide on technically and legally, objectively, and at the same time, not close your doors at the end of the day of going a third-party adjudication, whatever that platform may be, and you both can also negotiate on that. At the end of the day, negotiation and diplomacy is all about compromise. But compromise must be fair, must be just. In our situation, that was not the case. But you have to explore that possibility here. And who knows? Then you can calibrate as well. So maybe that's my advice. I have something more detailed on that. I've looked at the map. I've studied your situation as well. And maybe in our teacher engagement, this is something that I can be of help. Because at the end of the day, it's about rule of law or aggression. I think the choice is clear. We want to have a peaceful environment. And it is possible. It is possible. But you have to put in that diplomacy at the right time. Not at a later time. Not when you see that it's being used as a cover, because it may be too late. As I mentioned, you have to see to it this in terms of rearing your child so that they don't grow spoiled brats. I think that's the point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we may take several questions. If you have any question, please raise your hand so we can take your questions.
All right. Thank you very much for your time. The Ambassador, His Excellency. My name is Fauzul Azim. I'm from Istanbul Sabahat University, Master's student in International Relations. And I learned about UNCLOS and things. And thank you very much for your explanation and so on and so forth. I would like to ask about the ASEAN role in terms of the dispute on SCA's dispute, and because the first thing I would like to ask about the positions of ASEAN member as individual and also as a whole organizations, and I read some of articles mention that ASEAN has failed to reach a common positions. So how it happens, I would like to hear from you. And also for informations in the next month, I am with our organization of Indonesia National Youth Council. I'm from Indonesia. We would like to help Southeast Asia Youth Summit in Sabahat University, and we would like to talk about ASEAN and Turkey partnerships. And we really would like to also hear about from the Philippine perspective about these partnerships and also about the SCS dispute mainly. Thank you very much.
Terima kasih Pak, sama-sama. Thank you for your question. In fact, I can answer that several ways firsthand because I was there in 2012. As you know, 2012 was a critical, and I was there all the way. We didn't have a joint statement, and that's why they said it failed because there was first time in ASEAN history that there was no joint statement. Every year, when there's an ASEAN meeting, the first deliverable or result is a joint statement. This shows the unity and the solidarity of the association. But for the first time in 2012, it was none. And you are correct. We could not have a consensus in the South China Sea, and that's very unfortunate. And therefore, it led to the question: how relevant is ASEAN in terms of settling disputes in the South China Sea? And my take is this, and I want to make a disclaimer: this is not the official position of the country or institution that I represent, but basically my personal, individual position based on my experience and my assessment. My first point here, and maybe I'll start with the anecdotal history, all right? Why we didn't have that. Actually, it was about a proposition in one of the statements of the South China Sea, which has something to do with a factual, objective reflection of the situation on the ground. And what was the situation on the ground in 2012? Scarborough Shoal. Unfortunately, one or two countries would not want the inclusion of such. What is lamentable is that these two countries are not even claimant states, right? They're not directly affected. All that we wanted is reflection, because this is the reality. But it was very clear that there was an outside influence. There was an outside pressure. So much so, I will make a short story, long story short. Let me summarize it today. There was an effort by another power to mediate and bring about a formula that we already rejected. In pushing for that formula, I was told, and I'm not saying this as a gossip, but firsthand, okay? So, I was told that, Mr. Bensurto, if you don't agree to this formulation, then ASEAN will have no joint statement. If ASEAN has no joint statement, it will weaken the association. I disagreed, and this is my answer. I beg to disagree with all due respect. If we agree to this formulation, which we also rejected before, it will weaken ASEAN, on the contrary. Because ASEAN, it will mean that ASEAN has become a rubber stamp of that powerful country. Because we cannot stand on our own ground objectively, which means the idea of mushawara, which is consensus. Mushawara, that's the term we use for consensus. There's no votation in ASEAN. It is a beautiful approach to try to reach a consensus. Now we see it can be abused. And with that outside pressure, instead of bringing out the beauty that it was supposed to project, it can actually be converted from consensus making to a veto power. I will be straight with you, because I was in that room with I was the only person who is non-foreign minister. But I was in that room. Everybody already agreed with the formulation, except one. And when he was asked, why are you disagreeing with the introduction? All that he could say, because we just don't want. Because we just don't want. And no disrespect to your foreign minister, who's a friend of mine at the time, Pa Marti. You know, Pa Marti was a very patient person. I like him. But in that meeting, he said, I don't usually lose my patience, but this time I did. And how could you fault him? How can somebody sabotage the entire process with that? Who's not even willing to give a reason why you're objecting to the inclusion? And that was a lesson for us. Let me go back to my conversation to that, who said it will weaken the association. He said, the moment you have no joint statement, it will be the demise of the association. I said, I beg to disagree. Because if we agree, we will lose our credibility and our centrality, and we're no longer going to have integrity, and we will be a rubber stamp. Years after, we're much better off. We're much better off because despite pressures from, you know this, your foreign service officer, people knows this, but I'm not a typical diplomat, so I will be more upfront. We know that South China Sea issue is something that we cannot discuss officially before. It's not part of the agenda, never part of the official agenda. Why? Because our northern neighbor will immediately be in all foreign capitals telling us, dictating, actually not telling us, dictating on. If you do this, if you include it in your agenda, it will sour our relations, it will have negative implications. For many years, we have been hijacked by that threat. But for the first time in 2012, beginning with 2010, the Philippines made its stand. And that's why we questioned the 9-line for the first time in 2010. And by 2012, we stood our ground that we will not agree to a statement that does not reflect the truth. And you know what? And if I have Brunei friends here, my kudos to them. The following year, in 2013, South China Sea became part of the official agenda. And so in every ASEAN meetings now, it is part of the process. In the past, before 2012, we only discussed it on the side, only on the side, not official. Why is it important? How can you solve something when you don't recognize the problem? You cannot solve a problem if you keep on denying the problem. And this is what China wants. It doesn't want clarification because ambiguity helps them. Because they have no legitimacy and therefore they hide behind the ambiguities of their claims. And that's why prior to arbitration, they want to maintain the ambiguity. Because under that ambiguity, they can hide. And so for us, clarification is part of the process. Part of the process also is the recognition that we have a problem. Then we can discuss solutions. And that was all about it. Now, on a more scientific, sophisticated reasoning. When you look at the South China Sea and you look at the ASEAN, it's a concentric circle. Concentric. The inner circle are the claimant countries. They are directly affected. Next to the inner circle are the affected states, indirectly, right? They're not claimant states, but they're affected. And then the third circular, the regional user, the user states of South China Sea. They're not directly affected, but their vessels, economy are dependent on the unhampered flow of goods, right? And then the outermost are those that are far away. They're all impacted in one way or another. Now, applying this concentric circle in the South China Sea, we have to have an innovative, imaginative approach in terms of our decision making on the South China Sea. What do I mean by that? The first inner circle who are directly affected must be given appropriate weight in terms of decision making, how to address the South China Sea. It cannot be hijacked by an outer circle that is not even a direct claimant. What does that mean? We now have to entertain conversation on how to modify consensus decision making that is reflective. It does not destroy the spirit of consensus building or mushawara, but it modifies it to the extent that it recognizes the reality on the ground. Because any theoretical framework that is devoid of reality does not work. And so ASEAN must now be open-minded in terms of approaching this realistically. There are so many ways, but I'll stop there for the meantime. It's a whole conversation for 3 or 4 hours, but let me stop there. Thank you.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you for the brief explanation. Because of the time limit, I think we don't have enough time for more questions. I will just take one more question. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand. Okay. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I had the privilege to be your country for about 8 months. It's a beautiful country. And seeing you here, all here, I'm very happy to see it. China signed UNCLOS, the original text, 1982, but later ratified after 94. But apparently during those periods, you had already disagreements. But it is apparent that, just the simple law student can understand that their arguments are baseless, inconsistent with the treaty, UNCLOS. So what do you think about it? They entered an international agreement which they aim not to comply with, or what was the reason? Because they had the choice not to ratify it. That's the sole reason for the Turkey not to ratify it, because we are strongly opposed to 12 miles territorial water argument, and we don't want to be caught by the dispute resolution solutions. But they knew that you would trigger that kind of agreement, and if this is true, then it is just bullying. I don't see another way to see it.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be with you here, sir, given your expertise and how you have dedicated yourself to serving others, no? Using law in the right way. So again, I wish to reiterate that. To your question, sir, I think there's several explanations. Number one, when you look at China years before it modernized, in the context of the South China Sea, it did not have the power. It did not have both the financial power, the capacity, and did not have the navy. In the 70s, in the 80s, it is severely limited in projecting. And therefore, given that limitation, it has to calibrate how to manage. And it sees law from that perspective. Because during those years especially, given the naval might and power of naval powers like the United States, and etc., they have seen law as something that can deter this expansionism as they see it from these naval powers. And that's why I said how ironic it is that a country that suffered from what they refer to as imperialism is now using that concept to dominate others. That's very unfortunate, but during the time that was the case. And when you look at the distance between mainland China and the Spratlys, it's about 800 nautical miles. And when you have no capacity, for you to be able to enforce what you want in that area, you need to employ assets. They didn't have that capacity. It's very expensive to send naval patrols to the area. And that's why to solve that logistical problem, they have to do mass reclamation, putting up artificial islands, and so they can deploy those naval assets so that the reaction to anything can be fast, can be quick, and immediately they can employ naval assets. As you have seen, they have that capacity. And so that was built. And that's why those reclamations did not come overnight. They have been part of a long-term plan. Second, they did not have that financial capacity before. That's why they consider themselves. You know, it's so unfortunate. I have so many friends from China, and for the longest time, they have been sympathetic to the developing countries. They have, in fact, identified themselves as a developing country. They were active in the group of 77, the non-aligned, etc. They have been objective. To a large extent, the economic boom that was quick and fast, the wealth accumulation eventually had an impact in terms of mindset. Suddenly, the financial capacity gave them the wherewithal to project military, and there was a transformation, both in the mindset and also in the capacity. And with that capacity and mindset, in fact, I will not mention names. Some of the people that I even engaged in direct negotiations, they were even very humble. They were humble that, but later on, 2013, I saw them berating my Brunei colleagues. I saw them in the hallway berating another diplomat in the full view of other diplomats. They were bullying Brunei diplomats. Why did you include it in the agenda? So this is how they are now, unfortunately. Because power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolute. If you're not able to manage that wealth correctly, it will be a temptation for you to expand and to see where that limit brings you. And this is most unfortunate because the implication of that is global. And this is what I told my American friends before. You don't want to, and my European friends, when we are, because in 2012, when I was asking the international community, you know, the only way to make this peaceful is when China feels that all of us are standing for the rule of law. It's peaceful. All we have to do is bring that message across that there is such a thing as rule of law, and you have to put that message. And some of these diplomats from Europe and they didn't want, because it's far away, because it's just a small rock. And that's why I have to explain to them, it's not just a small rock. It's about mindset, because aggression is a mindset. It's not about the weapon that you have, because if I have a mindset of aggression, even with a pen, I can use this to do aggression to anyone. And so you have to understand it from that perspective. And so it's not about the rock. If China is able to get Scarborough Shoal without sweat, then it will create a mindset, oh, this must be the right policy because the dividend is quick and fast. Any debate between the hawks and the doves, they disappear. There's only one policy that is outstanding because it delivers, and that is the policy of aggression. Therefore, this is what I told my European friends and my American friends. They get Scarborough Shoal, Senkaku will be in danger, Northern Passage will be in danger. I did not predict Crimea, but you will see the chronology. In 2012, they got Scarborough. When did Crimea happen? 2014. Because these people, they learn from each other. The new mindset that China brought into the table of geopolitics, I can come, grab you, nobody complains. At the end of the day, I got it. I got this battle. Somebody from the European side saw that it can be done that way, march through Crimea without sweat, and so that policy of appeasement in terms of geopolitics does not work. We saw that it did not work in World War II. The evil that you try to prevent actually happens. And so there must be a more creative approach than leaving your fate to the hands of that somebody. And this is how, and that's why it's very important now for us to be conscious of what's happening on one part of the world, because they will have implications. Let me expound this a little more. In the beginning of the Ukrainian war, we saw missiles going into Ukraine, but Ukraine cannot get back to Russia, right? I think China learned from that. So when Pelosi visited Taiwan, what did it do? Missiles Taiwan, right? So, and we cannot get back to, because they're a nuclear power. I think we now have to understand the dynamics of geopolitics in a better way. That whenever something happens in one part of the world, we must be able to stand up for the rule of law, because there's no other alternative for now. This is not the time to abandon rule of law. This is the time for us to stand together and stand up for the rule of law, because rule of law is the tie that binds us all in a community of nations. Maybe that's how I will answer it, but again, it's a 3-hour conversation, and I have empirical data also to support whatever thesis I bring into the table. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bensurto, for the answer. I really would have loved to take more questions, but because of the limited time and the schedule, unfortunately, I will not be able to take more questions. So once again, I want to express my gratitude for you, and I'd like to thank everybody who participated to the conference. But I will request you to stay here on the stage for a moment, because we have a small gift for you. So now I want to invite my friend Abdul Kerim to deliver the gift.
Thank you.